Welcome to Maryl Today, where we break down topics that matter, mind, heart, and soul, and break through to solutions you can use to improve your life or business today. I'm your host, Maryl Paz, and this week's topic is identity, especially in relationship to film. If you love movies and media like I do and understand that what we watch has an impact on how we feel and see ourselves, this show is for you. Let's get started. Hello and welcome to the show. I'm thrilled you could join us for the conversation on identity with our guest today, Marissa Hicks-Alcaraz. Marissa is currently the Director of Programming for the Latin American Cinemateca of Los Angeles and has curated programs for the New York Museum of Modern Art, the Vincent Price Art Museum, and the Chicano International Film Festival, among others. She's here to talk to us about the intersection of identity, race, gender, and film, a fascinating and very relevant topic today. Marissa, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me.
So the first thing I wanted to ask you, I know that you're a multicultural background, right? Mm-hmm. Can you tell us a little bit about where you were born and what your parents' background is?
So I was born in Los Angeles, in Pasadena. And my father was born in San Jose. He's Anglo-American. And my mom is from Mexico, born in Tijuana, but grew up in Sinaloa. And then she's also Arab, but she didn't let us know that we were Arab until 9/11.
What?
So yeah, so I think it was just something that was it just wasn't part of her identity. She grew up Mexican, speaking Spanish. She didn't know who her father was, her biological father. She didn't know who her biological father was, and I guess it was kind of like
taboo?
It was like a love affair type deal. Okay. Yeah, so it's like nobody wanted to talk about it.
Okay.
And so, yeah, so she just grew up, feeling that she was 100% Mexican, Mexicana. And then 9/11 happened, and all of a sudden it's like Arabs and Muslims, all of a sudden like all over the media, whereas like before, the U.S., like Americans, weren't really super familiar with the Arab world, with Muslims before 9/11. Not in the way that like other European countries have been because of colonialism. So like France and Britain, for example.
And had you been? I mean, when you found out, you said you was around 9/11. Were you familiar with the culture at all?
No, not really.
Okay.
No. So, yeah, she was talking one day about how she was in the doctor's office and she was in the lobby waiting, and she was looking at a magazine, and how like somebody had come up to her and was just like staring at her, but like in this really strange way that she hadn't experienced before. And I remember we were at a grocery store once where it's like there was an elderly woman who was staring at me in a way that I had never experienced before, and she had brought it up, and she was like, yeah, she's like, I think it was because she thought that I was Arab, and then she starts to tell us the story. Well, actually, we are Arab. It's just that we just didn't ever.
By the way, we're Arab.
She never met her father.
Wow.
And so so then I started to connect the dots. I was like, oh, okay. So people are now starting to perceive me as Arab or Muslim, whereas before it was just maybe Mexican because where we grew up. So we lived in Los Angeles till about I was 7, and then we moved up to Northern California. To South Santa Cruz County, which is predominantly Mexican and Mexican American. And so it's like before 9/11, people perceived us as Mexican or maybe just something like more ambiguous. People didn't really know what we were. And then like after 9/11, it's like all of a sudden we're Arab.
Oh my God. Okay, so how does that, we'll go into, your whole educational and professional and career background, but personally, how did that piece of information shift your sense of identity?
Tremendously. I think it also very much shaped my intellectual genealogy because after high school, you have more freedom to like, explore and take classes on things that you had never experienced before that are outside of that like core curriculum, and so that's when I really started to explore my identity. So I started taking classes at the local community college on like, there's one class I took like Islam 101 and like just like very like introductory courses to the Middle East, and I was just so blown away and so astounded by like how little I knew, but also like Americans know about the Middle East and about Arabs and Muslims. And so I decided to get my major in Middle Eastern and North African Studies. So I transferred from community college to UCLA, and then finished my BA there, and I focused my thesis on American Muslim stand-up comedy and the way that comedians were using their comedy as a way to challenge stereotypes about Muslims and discrimination.
So this really actually shaped, this small piece of information of your background really shaped where you took your career. But then how did film come into all of this?
Well, UCLA, has an amazing film department, and I had always, when I was little, we would make films, so always making films, and so I decided to take a couple of classes. I took a class on Tunisian film, and it was one of my favorite classes, and so I just thought, well, I should focus on something that I really love to do, like what are my favorite classes, and they're related to film, and so I was like, okay, I will get my master's in cinema studies, and so that's how I ended up at NYU, and there was a shift. I think being in New York, where there aren't very many Mexicans and Mexican Americans, I felt like, I don't know, being in California, maybe I had taken it for granted. It's just like Mexican culture is everywhere you go. Whereas in New York, there is very much like a Latino or Latinx presence, but it's much more so like Puerto Rican and Dominican. And there was really, in terms of my program at NYU, there wasn't really a presence of Latin American film. And so that's why I decided to shift back and focus on specifically Chicanx film and film curating.
Did you feel that where you were, because you didn't find people who were also Mexican, which was the environment you'd been in, and like you said, taken for granted that, hey, everybody, every place that I'm in the United States is not like this. That drove you to sort of kind of assert more the sort of the Chicano aspect of your ethnicity?
Yeah, absolutely. I think because it was always there, and I just felt like, how is it possible that like a school like NYU, it's like we don't have like a class on Chicano or Chicanx filmmaking, when it's just like we have like whole departments, on the East Coast dedicated to like Chicanx studies, for example. And
on the West Coast.
Sorry, on the West Coast, yes. And so also it's like I really wanted to focus on the hybridity of culture as well, because
the what?
Hybridity of culture.
Oh, okay. So hybrid and
hybrid cultures.
Okay. So
right.
tell us a little bit about that, because I feel I was born in Peru. I raised in the United States, and I feel like a cultural hybrid. Language and everything plays a part into it, and but I feel like that's a unique experience. What you wanted to focus on this, so what exactly was it that you focused on?
So I focus actually on Robert Rodriguez's films, specifically on like his horror films, and then like where he fit into the canon of Chicano film, because it's like he's more of like the newer generation, the third wave that maybe is even like rejecting that term Chicano, but really it's like he still uses those same kind of political themes, except for they're more embedded, they're more subtle, but it's like there's still those political themes that are, on immigration, that are on labor rights.
So, like, give us an example of his films, because, for example, when I was an entertainment features and culture journalist, I did interview him, and I covered some of his films. I think the one that came out when I was still doing that was Sin City. And when I think of Sin City, I don't think of ethnicity at all, and I don't really think of, politics very much. It's something that I think of artistic and its action. And which film would you say is an example of what you're talking about of his?
I would say Machete is a very political film.
Okay.
It's,
how so?
Well, I mean, he's there to defend like labor rights. Machete.
Yeah, they're to defend
labor rights. Yeah. The common worker who like comes up and resists. Against the politician.
Right.
But even like films like Sin City or all of his Spy Kids films, like he doesn't center ethnicity. Like it's not something that's like really even like talked about. It's not made a big deal of, because it's like I feel like he's trying to say that this should be natural.
Right. Like it shouldn't be a factor. Right.
Yeah. Okay. So my ethnicity is just one aspect of who I am.
Right.
Yeah.
And not the only thing that I should be, or that my films should be looked at for. Okay.
And that's what I would say is one of the main differences between his films and like the older generations of Chicano filmmaking.
And so, how did this translate into, your focus as an expert is identity, it's race, it's gender. How did it expand into that?
From there?
Yes. From being only, I would say ethnicity and going from your background into, a little bit more expanded.
Yeah, so now mostly what I focus on is like Chicanx, like film, and specifically film festivals, like ethnography.
Okay, wait, explain to me the X. So it's Latin X and Chicanx, just really fast.
Sure, of course.
What's the X and why?
The X is trying to get away from the female male binary. Okay. So it's trying to be more inclusive, more gender inclusive of those who don't conform to those binaries or who identify outside of those and who are gender non-conforming. So it's just a way to be more inclusive of different sexualities.
Okay.
Yeah, and I feel like it's making a political statement that culture, identity, and sexuality are all interwoven. They're not separate, and we need to be talking about them all together.
I agree. We're going to take a quick break and be right back with Marissa and more on identity.
I understand. I know it's not your typical resume.
Okay, well.
But candidate. But I've been working double shifts just to pay for books. I've been raising my 2 little brothers. I'm determined, driven, motivated. Isn't that what you're looking for?
Look beyond the resume and discover new ways to develop great talent at gradsoflife.org.
Caminábamos hacia la escuela.
Me puse a pensar en el almuerzo.
Ella es
Hubiera preferido
inteligente,
pizza, como la
pero
que
deja
tiene
volar
los
su
Wichis.
mente.
Ahí hay un videojuego.
Recuerdo haberle dicho, Laura, el cartel dice no camine.
A veces leer es muy difícil.
Realmente espero que hoy no le vaya mal en la escuela.
Cuando usted ve las dificultades de aprendizaje y de atención de su lado, se pondrá de su lado. Visite understood.org, un recurso gratuito en línea con apoyos y herramientas para que su hijo progrese.
Welcome back to the conversation with Marissa Hicks-Alcaraz on the topic of identity. Marissa, how does culture, be it art or film, because I know that you've curated both art shows and film festivals, how does it shape our identity? Going straight into the topic.
Well, I think that film festivals, for example, help to define identity. But I don't think that it's like a one-way process. I think that, audiences come with their own sense of how to define their own identity, and so then that becomes like a negotiation between those who are curating, but then also other audience members. And so it's like really like this social space where it's like you can get together to like define like who you are as a group, but then also to negotiate, to affirm it, but then even sometimes to contest it as well.
Okay, so give me an example from the latest. You just had an event actually, yes? Or you're about to?
We're about to,
Okay.
yeah, next week.
Okay,
next weekend.
So give me an example. How did you create this space? You created a space for people to come and have an experience. What does that negotiation look like?
Well, I think it's something that happens very much in the dialogue. We make sure to have like a Q&A after each of our screenings, or for this one, for other like film festivals that we've done, for the Chicano International Film Festival, for example, we have panels as well. On top of like screenings where you have the Q&As, we'll have more of something that's more of like an open panel where we'll have guests that we'll talk about like what does it mean to be Chicano, what is this new identifier Chicanx, and so it's like we'll have specialists or maybe like professionals in the industry who will give their perspectives, but then it's very much about engaging with the audience as well, and it's like how they understand their own identities and how these differ. And really I think it's a space where it's so amazing because you get to see like all these different perspectives all coming together, and I think that is where growth and that's where change happens, is like when we're being exposed to all of these different worlds and different perspectives. Because I feel personally that identity is not something that's like fixed or stagnant. It's always changing, especially with like the newer generations as well, who are now want to identify with this new identifier like Chicanx, for example. And so like these are spaces where we can talk about what these different definitions are, and then just kind of like negotiate. Okay, like, so what does this now mean for like us as a collective, for example?
Do you go into an art or a film space with the intention to create and send a message, or is that something that just kind of happens organically?
I think I definitely go in with a theme, usually when I introduce the films, it's like I like to give an introduction that provides a framework for the films that they're about to watch. For example, we're having our Cine Sin Fronteras program on Saturday, and those are experimental films from the Morelia International Film Festival. And we curated the film, Jesse Lerner and I, who is a professor at Pitzer College. We chose the films that spoke to us, and then from there, it's like the theme kind of like emerges. And for me, the theme was shifting grounds. So it's like all of these films were very, the camera work was like very chaotic, it was unstable, and I felt that really reflected like our current like political moment as well. And I thought that was really, really fascinating connection in a way that it was like something that was like physical and material through the actual camera work, but then comes through the themes of the works as well. And so, yeah, I mean, you can throw that theme out there, but it's like, I mean, the audience, I mean, they're gonna interpret it, any way that they want, and
according to their own worldview.
Exactly. And so if they take away something totally different, and sometimes that happens where it's like you have this idea of like where your program is going to go, and no, like the audience wants to take it elsewhere, and I think that's part of respecting what the audience needs and what they want as well. So it's very much, it's a two-way, three-way process. It's not just the curator, and it's just like, this is what's going to happen, this is how I want you to interpret the films. No, it's a very kind of social phenomenon.
Yeah. So what is, I'm sure, yes, you've created and curated these spaces for this to happen. You've also probably visited others and other curated and created spaces. What's the most shocking thing you've seen when it comes to identity in some of these spaces? Or something that has made an impact on you?
Well, let me see. In terms of identity, I would say something that's shocking, but it's more in terms of curating and what goes on behind the scenes.
Okay. Let us in behind the scenes.
Yeah. Well, I think like programmers they'll have a set of criteria for themselves, and it's, you know, they'll announce their criteria, you know, this is like how we're going to be judging these films and this is how they're going to be selected. But then like when you're in the process, it's like all of that goes out the window. And I think that's what makes it so hard to like describe what it is exactly, like how you select films and how you program, and even like how, because I also study film festivals and I study film curating. I think that's one of the things that makes it so difficult is like, so you have like an agenda, like what you're going to do in theory, and then in practice, it's like it just gets thrown out the window. And I think it's just like because it's just like it's almost like the films are people themselves, and it's just, I don't know, when you're up there in the moment and then you have like rules that you have to abide by. I don't know, it's art, so it's like it's really hard to follow those kinds of guidelines. So I think that was one of the things that's most surprising. It's like, yeah, well, like sometimes it's like you are connected to a film that doesn't, you can't even like put it down in words. It doesn't abide by any of the other guidelines that you put up, but it's like, yes, that is exactly what I want to be screened in my film festival, for example.
What would you like, and you know, and this is also given the whole Me Too movement, and you know, I know gender is part of something that is part of identity, and also something that you studied and researched. What is something you'd like to see 10 years from now with regards to identity and what we see in film and art?
Well, I would love to see more women on the screen. I'd love to see more women behind the screen, or in front of the camera and behind the camera, and definitely in terms of programming as well. And then even like when you're programming as well, it's like making sure that you have a balance of not only women but also you know, queer folks as well. And so yeah, so having films that are more inclusive of women, but then also like alternative identities, like those that fall outside of, you know, the male, female. So gender nonconforming individuals, like the whole spectrum that is so complicated of the LGBTQI plus, IA plus. Yeah. So there's a whole spectrum, and it's like when we have like mainstream film festivals, it's usually, even if we do go into like queer identity, it's more of what I would describe as more as like mainstream queer identity. So like gay, lesbian, maybe a little bit of bisexual, but there's like so much more like in between and outside of that. So I'd love to see more of that as well. Well,
I think hopefully we can. I think we're heading that way. So
definitely.
I would love to see more of diversity in any and all range on screen as well. Still to come, my conclusions on the topic and conversation, so stay with us. We'll be right back.
Cuando estaba en crianza temporal, nunca sabía cuándo me iba a tener que mudar, así que siempre tenía mi maleta lista. Y un día me adoptaron. Mis nuevos padres me abrieron sus corazones y su hogar. Ellos me cocinan mi desayuno favorito todas las mañanas. Mis padres me llevan a viajes que jamás pensé podría ir. Me dieron un hogar y una mejor excusa para usar esa maleta. Mis padres no son perfectos, pero son perfectos para mí.
I don't remember how it started.
Go to that.
Our back and forth. It always came back.
Dad!
You probably don't remember what you told me.
That was perfect.
But I heard every word.
There's so much to say with regards to identity and diversity and film and art, but here's what I want to leave you with. A movie is a message, and it tells a story from the point of view of all the people that create it. And it can have an effect on you and your sense of identity, how the world sees you, and therefore how you then see yourself in the world. Choose wisely and support films that support you and the amazing creation that you are. My hope for you today is that you get a more clear sense of the connection between media, art, and film, and your own sense of self, and that you begin to see the stories developing around you with a discerning eye, and maybe even be inspired to create and tell your own story. I'd like to thank my guest, Marissa Hicks-Alcaraz, for all her insight on the topic of identity. Thank you to our wonderful sponsors, and as always, all my gratitude to and for my amazing crew. Be sure to follow us on Twitter at Maryl Tweets and Facebook and Insta at Maryl Solis Paz for more insights and inspiration. Until next time, I'm Maryl Solis Paz, wishing you and yours paz, amor, y luz.